Hey, thanks for clicking on the video. It's finally time for a Titan build, and I figured what other build than one that drops room clearing and boss melting nukes with every click. Yeah, this is a build that lets our Titans deal almost 800,000 damage from one melee ability. This is the build that generates 45% of your super from one melee. This is the build that nukes things so violently that champions don't even have time to regenerate or put up their shields or whatever. This is the king of Titan builds, and today we're going to break down every piece of this so that you can get out there and be the best Titan you can be. And no, you don't need an exotic class item. This build and everything you just saw was with a single exotic armor piece that you probably already have. But before breaking everything down, if you enjoy this build or are looking for other builds, a subscription would be much appreciated. I put out content just like this regularly, and if you enjoy a good build and informative Destiny content, you're in the right place. Now with that aside, let's start with our exotic armor piece, Syntheseps. Any Titan out there knows that if we're in the business of looking for maximizing our damage output, this is the go-to exotic. This is the perk, Biotic Enhancements, that reads, when you're surrounded, gain increased melee and super damage, as well as improved handling and reload speed. The performance we see here has our base melee, which starts at a value of 10,615 damage, which is 20% higher than the other two classes if you didn't know that, brought up to 28,130. That's a 165% increase in our melee damage. It also augments our super, giving it 50% more damage, flat out. As an example, our Blade Fury Light Attack does 41,037 damage without Syntheseps, and then 61,555 with Syntheseps equipped. I also want to dwell on this for a moment before beginning the process of turning these melees into literal nukes. What I want to dwell on is that this increased super damage is missing on the class item variant. In most cases, you can usually get a better build by using the class item, which I'll talk about at the end of the video, but there are also times where it's better to run the base exotic of Syntheseps. A good example is when doing Vesper's Host, we want increased melee damage while running the Servitor Encounter, and increased super damage for DPS in the Servitor Encounter. I should also mention the class item variant doesn't have the boost to handling and reload speed, but these are pretty negligible effects since for the most part, we're meleeing rather than shooting. But moving on from our exotic armor piece, we're skipping right into our Prismatic subclass. This is where most of the heavy lifting comes from. To start with our abilities, our super can be whatever you like. Glacial Quake and Blade Fury give us the highest uptime on our super, and Glacial Quake can actually be the best super for DPS. But there isn't a necessary pick here. Next is our class ability, which is going to be Thruster. This is the shortest cooldown and comes in handy for all sorts of utility later in the build. Our melee definitely needs to be Frenzied Blade because it has 3 charges and can also be used to sever enemies if necessary. Sever is actually quite potent, decreasing enemy damage output a massive amount. Next though is our grenade, which should either be Glacier Grenade or Shackle Grenade. These are chosen because they deal dark damage and are great for crowd control, but mostly for the dark damage part, which becomes very important as we talk about Transcendence. Now though, at this point in the build, we aren't dropping any nukes, but that changes with our first aspect, being the extremely popular Consecration. To quickly read its description, while sliding, activate your charged melee ability to launch a wave of solar energy forward, damaging and scorching targets in front of you as you leap into the air. While airborne, activate your charged melee again to slam into the ground and create a second larger wave of damaging solar energy. If the wave hits a scorched target, they ignite. So looking at that, I'm sure everyone has seen a Titan do this before, but you slide, go up, come back down, and deal massive damage, with the first wave priming and the second wave igniting. The second wave is actually where the bulk of the damage comes from, with that dealing 78,213 damage at base, and this is without the ignition. Then if we add Syntheseps damage increase to that, it deals 138,176 damage. And remember, this is just half the damage, as we'll also have an ignition going off at the same exact time. I just can't show off numbers accurately because Carl ends up dying too fast. But before touching on the last way to stack damage on this ability, I also want to point out a little known fact. While you're mid-slam animation, you actually take 25% less damage from range attacks. So you're getting a pretty big boost in survivability just for trying to kill things. But now moving to the next aspect, we have Knockout. Critically wounding a target or breaking their shield infuses your melee attacks with arc energy and increases your melee range and damage for a short time. Defeating targets with melee attacks makes you amplified and restores a portion of your health. Defeating more powerful combatants increases the amount of health restored. A lot goes on here, but the main thing to note for the activation is that you'll proc knockout on any kill, as I guess that counts as critically wounding them. Next is that with knockout active, any melee kill, be it from Consecration AoE or your own fist, will heal from 50 to 100 HP, depending on the enemy tier. So you can full heal with just 4 red bar kills. But then the big piece that most interests us is the increased melee damage, which is 100% to our base melee and 50% to our charged melees, which means for Consecration here, we are now dealing 207,264 damage on the slam. This is up from 78,213 at base, or a total increase of 264%. But of course, this whole time we've just been looking at one portion of the slam. Its ignition counterpart also scales, which when put all together, gives us an ignition damage of 259,080. I also want to point out a little testing quirk that came up just because it's kind of interesting. When getting an ignition in Carl, the slam deals more damage too, which is why we see the 300,000 number in this clip, but for getting all the math we just did, a single melee is dealing nearly 800,000 damage to Carl, and then at least 200,000 damage to everything nearby. A true nuke goes off with every slam, and you don't even need to think about the process. Just slam on your enemies and you're good. But now, moving on to the fragments, the rest of our subclass, everything here is fairly simple. Facet of Protection gives us DR when near enemies, so that's all the time. Facet of Ruin gives us larger ignition AoE and more damaging shatters if you're using Glacier Grenade or Glacial Quake. Facet of Balance is so our Consecration kills refund a bit of melee energy. Facet of Sacrifice, so our Consecration fills up our Dark Transcendence meter. And then Facet of Courage, so that our ignitions deal 10% more damage to dark debuffed enemies, with our grenade being the easiest application of those debuffs. But now, fragments aside, before leaving our subclass to look at weapons, armor, and the artifact, this build is very reliant on Transcendence. By having a high uptime on this, we can essentially forget about our melee cooldown, and to do this, rely on our weapons and some fragments we just covered, but mainly it's from our weapons. Unironically, one of the best weapon combos is Lost Signal and Velocity Baton. Area Denial Frames absolutely pump out Transcendence energy. Since we barely need to use our weapons, we can abuse these 2 GLs for max Transcendence uptime. But if you don't want to run these, Tenacious Mastery is an amazing option. Even Exdirus is fantastic, which I just recently put out a video on. And if you don't want to run double special, make sure you at least have 1 light and 1 dark weapon. Also, your heavy can be anything. Tractor Cannon, Eager Edge Swords, or Reliable GL are just great options. But now, we can move over to armor mods and stats. Stats should be Resilience and Strength first and foremost, with Discipline and Recovery next. Mod-wise, helmets are going to be triple hands-on. This will give us tons of super energy on melee kills, and especially large amounts from killing high tier enemies. This is what enables us to get close to half of our super in one slam. Arms are going to be triple heavy handed so that we spawn orbs on nearly every melee kill. There's only a 1 second cooldown on generation versus the 10-second cooldown with one mod. Chest piece is resist as usual. Legs are an invigoration, better already, and orbs of restoration for optimal ability regen on orb pickup. And then class item is powerful attraction, special finisher, and outreach. I also want to quickly note that for our exotic class item, Spirit of Inmost plus Spirit of Synthos is by far the optimal role. This essentially gives you melee spam with or without Transcendence. But like I mentioned earlier in the video, a class item definitely isn't necessary. And then finally, we have our artifact. There actually isn't too much that interfaces directly to this episode. Overload GL is good if we're running the denial frames or other GLs. Authorized mods melee allows us to run all of our melee armor mods with extra room for stat mods, giving us the perfect build. And the last one that really matters is concussive reload, so our GLs weaken for even more nukage. The rest of the artifact really only affects our stasis and arc abilities, which outside of Glacier Grenade, we don't have a ton of investment there. But with that, Hail the Storm and Conductive Cosmic Crystal are not bad options. And now onto our gameplay loop. It's extremely simple. We'll begin engagements by spamming our light and dark weapons to begin building Transcendence. In between shots, which are meant for meteor more than kills, you're gonna start slamming. This will proc knockout and spawn orbs, keeping our health topped up while nuking everything. In between slams, continue to work towards filling your Transcendence meters, which once full, pop it and begin the slam spam again. The amount of kills we score will keep us in Transcendence for a very long time. Just remember to toss a grenade to fast track your melee while in this mode. Once that ends, you'll probably have a super, so feel free to let loose. Repeat the process, nuking room after room, champion after champion, and even bosses. This build has been meta for so long, and it continues to do so. Honestly, I'd try it out before it gets nerfed. And with that, I think that's everything I wanted to say. Let me know down in the comments below if you've used this build. I'm sure a lot of us have, and especially let me know if you haven't used this build, because it's cracked and you need to try it. As usual, thank you so much for getting this far into the video. Your viewership means a ton. If you want to support me and support the channel, a like, a comment, a subscription goes a very long way. If you want to support me and support the channel, if you can't think of a comment down below, slam spam, because I thought that was kind of funny in the script. And with that, as usual, I hope you are having a great day, and I hope to see you around.